Hi, I'm his daughter. At least that's how he introduced me to a ballroom of 300 guests as the one who deals with the mentally ill all day. They laughed, he laughed, and I stood there like a stranger in my own name, my own life. But what if I told you that wasn't the worst part? What if I told you this wasn't the first time he rewrote who I was? And what if, for the first time in my life, I didn't let him finish the sentence? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what would you have done if your own father humiliated you on stage? Because I didn't walk away, I took the mic, and I told them everything. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the ballroom was the light. Not bright, not harsh. Soft, golden, carefully designed to make everything look expensive and effortless. Crystal chandeliers hung low enough to feel intimate, but high enough to remind you this wasn't a room meant for ordinary people. The kind of place where voices stayed polished and laughter never sounded accidental. My father moved through it like he owned the air, not rushing, not looking around. Just nodding here, smiling there, shaking hands with men who wore confidence the way others wore watches. This was his world. It always had been. I followed a few steps behind him, careful not to crowd his space. I knew better than that. I wore the right dress, the right shoes, the right neutral expression. Still, I felt slightly off, like a guest who had wandered into the wrong wedding. I belonged here by blood, not by status. And everyone could feel the difference, even if no one said it out loud. People recognized him instantly. The way their faces lit up told me everything. They leaned in when he spoke. They waited when he paused. When he placed a hand lightly on someone's shoulder, it meant something. When he glanced at me, it didn't. This wasn't new. I didn't need a reminder. At one point, a woman with a clipboard brushed past me and murmured, "Staff entrance is around the corner," without even looking up. I didn't correct her. I just stepped aside and let her pass, heat rising slowly into my face. It was easier that way. Correcting people took energy. Enduring took practice. I had plenty of that. Dinner plates clinked softly. A string quartet played something familiar but forgettable. I found my seat at a table near the side, not close enough to be seen, not far enough to leave. The place assigned to people who were technically invited. I folded my hands in my lap and reminded myself why I was here. Family obligation, appearances. The unspoken rule that you show up even when you already know how the evening will end. I work with people most of this room prefers not to think about. Men and women navigating panic, depression, trauma. People learning how to breathe through days that feel too heavy. I chose that work on purpose. I never apologized for it. But nights like this reminded me how carefully I had learned to brace myself before anyone asked what I did. No one asked. They rarely did. When my father stood, the room shifted. Conversations softened, then stopped. Chairs turned. Glasses paused mid-air. He took the microphone with ease, testing it once, smiling like this was all a friendly performance. I stayed seated, my spine straight, my face calm. I already felt myself fading, becoming part of the decor. He thanked donors. He praised vision. He spoke about legacy. Words like impact and excellence floated through the air, landing exactly where they were meant to. People laughed at the right moments. They always did. Then he gestured toward me. "And, of course," he said, his tone light, amused, "my youngest is here tonight." A few heads turned. Polite interest, mild curiosity. "She didn't follow the family path," he continued. "She prefers hands-on work, spends her days caretaking people who can't really function on their own." A pause, just long enough. "Mentally ill patients," he added, smiling. Laughter rippled across the room, not cruel, not loud, worse than that, casual, comfortable. For a moment, everything inside me went still. My hearing dulled, like someone had lowered the volume on the world. I could see faces, mouths moving, shoulders shaking with amusement. My body reacted before my thoughts did. My hands tightened, my breath shortened. My feet pressed flat against the floor, grounding me where I sat. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I focused instead on the microphone in his hand. How easily he held it. How certain he was of the outcome. This was how it always went. I absorbed the moment. I carried it quietly. I waited for it to pass. But something else settled in alongside the numbness. Not anger, not yet. Just awareness. I stayed still. I didn't smile. And for the first time, I didn't shrink either. My cheeks moved before I even realized what they were doing. A practiced lift, the faintest hint of a smile. Not joy, nothing close. It was the kind of smile you wear when the cameras are on, when everyone's looking and you're expected to show grace, not grit. I stood there, still facing the crowd, my body quietly bracing itself, while something inside me shifted. Not outwardly, not yet. I became intensely aware of my arms, too stiff, hanging awkwardly at my sides. I adjusted one to hold the other, a subtle gesture, almost like I was hugging myself. My eyes scanned the room, but I didn't meet anyone's gaze. It was easier that way. If I didn't see their reactions, maybe I could pretend it hadn't happened. But of course, it had. There was a ripple in the air, small but sharp. The kind of ripple you feel in your chest before you can place what caused it. Not a gasp, not outrage. Just discomfort. A couple of people gave those half smiles that only exist to fill silence. One man cleared his throat and looked at his watch. A woman near the front leaned in to whisper something to her friend, eyebrows raised. But no one said a word to him, not even a gentle, polite correction. And that silence, that's what stung most. It wasn't just what he'd said, it was that everyone had heard it and decided to keep going. I stayed where I was, hands now loosely clasped, heart thudding so quietly, I could feel it behind my ribs more than I could hear it. My father handed off the microphone and laughed with someone near the podium, already sliding into the next conversation as if he hadn't just reduced my work, my life, to a joke in front of 200 people. My sister walked over, glass of wine in hand. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look embarrassed. She looked practiced. "Don't take it personally," she murmured, voice low enough only I could hear. "You know how he is." I didn't answer. My throat was too tight for words anyway. She leaned in a little closer, still smiling for the benefit of anyone watching. "He didn't mean it like that. Just let it go. This isn't the place." There it was. That sentence. The one I'd heard 1,000 times in different forms. This isn't the place. Meaning, don't make a scene. Don't upset the family. Don't ruin the night. Don't be the reason people feel uncomfortable. But wasn't I already that? I didn't argue. I never did. That was part of the conditioning. Keep the peace. Smile when it hurts. Just like now. I turned slightly, pretending to adjust the strap on my dress, giving myself something, anything, to do with my hands. The fake smile was still there, glued in place like it was stitched into my skin. A waiter passed by with a tray of flutes. I took one, though I didn't really want it. The bubbles tickled my nose, the taste sharp and dry. I kept sipping anyway. If I didn't, I might scream. I reminded myself of the usual excuses. He grew up in a different time. He believes in tangible success, degrees, titles, things you can hang on a wall. What I do isn't that. It's messy, exhausting, invisible work. Healing isn't glamorous. It's not a headline. It's not a plaque. But still, the way he said it, caretaking people who can't function, like I'd settled for something small, like I'd chosen the minor leagues on purpose. He used to say I had potential. Back when I was 15 and good at math. Back when I wore blazers to high school speech competitions, and he thought I'd end up in corporate law. The moment I told him I was going into mental health care, his voice dropped an octave. He didn't yell, he didn't protest, he just went quiet. That kind of quiet that echoes longer than noise. The funny thing is, I used to be proud of what I do. Not just proud, certain. I knew I was where I was supposed to be. But in rooms like this, that certainty shrinks. It doesn't disappear, but it hides. I looked around again. Music had started back up. Something jazzy, tasteful, utterly forgettable. People were back to sipping, laughing, moving between tables. A few glanced my way, quickly looking elsewhere when they saw I was still watching. No one approached me. No one apologized. That was the rhythm of these events. Keep the night moving, keep the wine flowing, keep the illusion intact. My embarrassment was a bump in the program, not a reason to pause. A man from one of the neighboring tables offered a sympathetic smile. That half nod people give when they want to say that was rough without getting involved. I nodded back, because what else was I supposed to do? I caught sight of my father again. He was talking to a donor, someone with a name stitched into the plaque at the back of the room. He laughed, tossed his head back slightly, completely at ease. His voice was just loud enough that I could hear the cadence, but not the words. Behind him, the microphone still sat on the stand. There was a time I would have believed that moment had been a misunderstanding, that he just chose his words poorly, that he didn't realize how it sounded. But standing there, still slightly apart from the rest of the room, I saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't thoughtlessness. It was intentional. Not in a malicious way, but in a calculated one. A way of establishing who mattered and who didn't. Who belonged at the center of the room and who stood quietly along the edges. And just like that, something in me crossed a line. Not loudly, not with a scene. But something shifted. That was when I understood something I had avoided my entire life. This wasn't about my job. It hit me quietly, not like a slap, but like an ache surfacing after years of pretending it wasn't there. This wasn't about what I did for a living. It never had been. He'd made it about my job because that was the safest disguise. Easier to mock what I do than to admit what he doesn't understand. Easier to reduce me to a label than confront who I've become. It wasn't personal, it was strategic. It kept things in order. And suddenly, I saw it. The moment wasn't an outburst, it was part of a script. One I'd been cast in since I was old enough to smile on cue and sit quietly when grown-ups talked over me. The stage hadn't changed, the lines hadn't changed, but something inside me had stopped playing along. I stood there, still holding the champagne I hadn't touched since the first sip. The chill had faded from the glass, and condensation had soaked into the napkin beneath it. I wasn't cold anymore. I was clear. Growing up, I was the practical one. That was my role. Not the golden child. That was my brother, who could charm a room before he'd finished middle school. Not the pretty one. That was my sister, who my mother insisted had that Kennedy smile. No, I was the steady one. The one who didn't cause problems, who got good grades, remembered birthdays, made things work. They didn't need to praise me. I didn't ask for it. But they made sure I knew the limits of my worth, not cruelly, just consistently. Recognition came in small, quiet doses. I once received a handwritten card after finishing my degree, folded without an envelope. No speech, no toast. "Nice work," it said, from my father. That was it. Funny how I kept that card in a drawer for 10 years like it was gold. I started tracing the pattern backward, not in a flood of memory, but like following crumbs I hadn't noticed until now. School plays where I worked backstage while the others took bows. Family dinners where my opinions landed with soft thuds, ignored in favor of louder voices. Times I brought news, good news, and heard, "That's nice," followed by a pivot to someone else's promotion, wedding, or baby. It wasn't that they didn't care, it was that they cared selectively. Visibility was reserved for those who played by the rules of the family show. And my rule: stay humble, stay out of the spotlight, don't expect applause. At some point, I mistook that rule for virtue. That's how it works, I guess. You get taught that love and approval are earned by shrinking yourself. You don't even notice you're doing it after a while. You just start choosing chairs at the edge of the room. You hold your tongue a little longer. You praise louder than you're praised. You make it easier for everyone to overlook you, and then you feel guilty for wanting to be seen. And in rooms like this, that's the currency. Not love, but control. Control disguised as tradition, as manners, as what's best for the family. The language is so polite, you don't hear the cost until years later. I looked over at my father again. He was pouring himself a drink, laughing, again, with a man whose name I couldn't remember, but whose family ran one of the biggest real estate firms in the city. I could tell by the way my father's hand rested on the man's back that this was someone he respected. He never touched me that way, not warmly, not with ease. He didn't need me to fail, he just needed me not to outshine him. And now, for the first time, I realized I had let him have that, over and over, not because I was weak, but because I thought silence was safety. I thought being agreeable meant being accepted. I thought keeping things peaceful would make me feel loved. But it hadn't. It just kept me stuck. The gala kept moving. Waiters floated through with dessert trays, all tiny tarts and glossy ganache, served like it mattered. A band started up again, soft jazz, pleasant and forgettable. Guests filled the space with a gentle hum of conversation, each group in their own bubble. It was strange, watching life proceed like nothing had happened. Like my humiliation was a commercial break they'd already skipped. I glanced toward the stage. The microphone was still there. It hadn't moved. And that detail lodged itself in my chest like a stone. Because for years, I'd believed I didn't have a choice, that the roles were assigned, and I was just being respectful by playing mine. But the thing is, the moment you notice the script, you get to choose whether to keep reading from it. And I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. A question came to me then, as clearly as if someone had whispered it in my ear. If I stay silent now, what exactly am I agreeing to? I didn't have the full answer yet, but I knew where to start. I looked up at that stage, the lighting still soft and warm, casting long shadows behind the podium. The microphone waited. He didn't rush toward me. That would have been too obvious. He moved the way he always did, unhurried, assured, like a man who believed the room would shift around him before he ever had to raise his voice. I watched him approach from the edge of the stage, weaving through small clumps of donors and friends of friends, pausing just enough to nod or shake a hand. His glass stayed full. His smile remained intact. And still, he made it to me in less than a minute. Our eyes met only once before he reached me. One glance. That's all it took. There was no question in his expression, no apology, just expectation. He looked at me the way someone checks the thermostat, curious if it's still working, still doing what it's supposed to. "Come with me," he said, low enough that no one else could hear, but in a tone that suggested refusing wasn't an option. We stepped just outside the ballroom, near the coat check, where music bled faintly through the closed doors. A couple of staff members passed by, avoiding eye contact. He turned slightly toward me but didn't square his body. That was intentional. He didn't want this to feel like a confrontation, just a correction. "This isn't the place," he began, his voice smooth, like always. "You don't want to do something you'll regret." I didn't respond. Not yet. My hands were steady, resting at my sides, but I could feel my jaw tightening. "I know you're upset," he continued, "but you have to understand. These people—" He motioned vaguely toward the ballroom. "They don't get it. They hear mental health and think you run a group home. You know how that sounds." I kept my face still. I'd learned that from him, too. He sighed, soft and theatrical. "Look, all I'm saying is, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Don't embarrass yourself." Embarrass myself. That choice of words didn't miss me. He was giving me a chance, his version of one anyway. A polite warning wrapped in concern. That if I spoke up, if I dared to challenge him, especially here, it wouldn't be just my job under scrutiny. It'd be my judgment, my image, my value. He wasn't worried about the truth, he was worried about appearances. But I didn't need a translator anymore. What he meant was, don't damage what I've built. Don't expose what I've kept hidden. Don't force me to choose between you and this world I belong to. He tilted his head slightly, waiting for me to nod, to give him a soft smile and fall back into place. I didn't move. Something inside me had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to recognize that this wasn't new. This same pattern, this same polite erasure, had played out for decades. It had just never happened in front of so many people before. He wanted compliance dressed as understanding. He wanted silence packaged as maturity. But standing there, I felt the boundary draw itself, not in words, but in weight. I no longer accepted the premise. His comfort no longer outranked my dignity. "You've worked hard to build your name," he said, quieter now. "I'd hate to see that shadowed by misunderstandings." And there it was, the cost, not stated outright, but sharp in its implication. The threat wasn't violence or disownment. It was subtler: social exile, reputational damage, professional rumors. All the tools people like him wield without ever raising their voice. And still, I stayed silent. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted to feel it, fully. The fear, the anger, the ache of it all. Because for most of my life, I'd walked away from that feeling the second it got close. I'd smoothed it over, dismissed it as overreaction, rewritten it to make sense. But this time, I let it stay. I let myself feel how heavy it was to be told, again, that protecting his place in the world was more important than claiming mine. Back inside, the lights had dimmed slightly. A woman I didn't recognize had taken the mic to announce a silent auction extension. People clapped, sipped their wine, returned to their conversations. The night hadn't paused for me. It never would. My father glanced toward the door, assuming I would follow. I didn't. I looked at the microphone again. It hadn't moved. He thought this was over. He thought I'd heard his warning and absorbed it like always. And maybe I had. But I'd also heard something else for the first time, myself. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't argue. I waited. I watched the door close behind him, the ballroom swallowing him up again like nothing had happened. And maybe nothing had, at least not to anyone else. The music still played, something jazzy and expensive sounding. Waiters circled with trays of champagne and miniature desserts, their faces unreadable, their steps practiced. Laughter rolled from different corners of the room like smoke, light and floating and impossible to grasp. I stood near the wall, slightly off to the side, just out of the line of vision, but not out of the room. Technically still part of the evening, still his daughter, still here. But not really. I watched people move through this space like I wasn't in it, like my skin had turned translucent. Pain, I realized, doesn't stop time. It doesn't slow down the music or the drinks or the quiet deals being made between handshakes and glances. It just locks you in place, watching everyone else move on. I felt something tighten in my throat, Not quite crying, but close. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you're the only one who noticed the room shift, but everyone's acting like it's the same. I told myself to breathe, to stay composed, that I had made a choice. But the quiet in my chest was deceptive. It wasn't peace, it was paralysis. The emotional kind. And then the questions started, the ones I didn't want. Why does this still hurt? Why can't I just get over it? Why does a single comment, even his comment, undo years of work I've done to build something real? I knew people who could let this roll off, who could laugh it off or brush it aside, tell themselves, that's just how he is, and keep smiling. I'd tried to be that person. Hell, I'd practiced it for decades. But my stomach told me the truth. There was something sick about pretending that disrespect was just family flavor. For a moment, I actually wondered if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was the price of being part of something bigger, of having a family name people respected. Maybe this discomfort was just the toll. And if that was true, how many tolls had I paid already? I scanned the room again, slower this time, looking for something, maybe a friendly face, maybe a neutral one, someone who'd meet my eyes and silently say, I saw that, you're not crazy. But they all looked past me, even the ones who'd laughed. Some of them had known me for years, grown up with me, smiled at me at holidays, asked about my work or my patients, or said, bless you, when I talked about the things I'd seen. And still, in this moment, they chose him. No one asked if I was okay. No one pulled me aside. The absence of that support didn't feel like an oversight. It felt like confirmation. There was no line I could cross that would make this crowd stop and say, wait, maybe she's right. And still, I didn't leave, but I wanted to, so badly. I imagined slipping out, quiet as a breath, making my way to the coat check, keys in hand, nodding politely at the concierge, driving through the empty streets back home. I pictured myself there, barefoot, curled up on the couch, a blanket pulled over my legs, the quiet buzzing around me instead of pressing in. It felt like safety. It also felt like surrender, because I knew what leaving would mean. Not just to him, but to the narrative that had always followed me. Too sensitive, too serious, can't take a joke. The caretaker who takes everything too personally. And if I disappeared now, they'd all say, see, that's what we meant. Still, the temptation hung there like a warm coat I could slip into. Familiar, comfortable. But as the music shifted to something more upbeat, and a new speaker took the stage to thank donors and announce matching gifts, I remembered other nights like this, smaller, quieter, at dinner tables, at weddings, at birthdays, where I'd stayed silent, where I'd laughed along or bit my tongue or swallowed my pride like it was just another side dish passed across the table. And I remembered how each one left a mark, not visible, but cumulative. Silence hadn't kept the peace. It had only taught people I was the kind of person who'd keep choosing peace over self-respect. I felt tired, not furious, not heartbroken, just tired. Tired of making myself smaller to keep other people comfortable. Tired of pretending things didn't sting. Tired of translating my reality so others wouldn't feel awkward. And in that weariness, something solid formed. A line I hadn't drawn before. Quiet, internal, but clear. I wasn't going to walk out. Not because I wanted a fight, but because leaving would mean they got to decide what this night had been. And I couldn't let that happen again. I took a deep breath, not because I was preparing to speak, but because I was preparing to stay present, to stay aware, to stay me. I could walk out and save myself the trouble, or I could stay and finally tell the truth. I stayed, not because it was easier, not because I wasn't terrified. I stayed because, for once, I knew what leaving would mean, and I didn't want to disappear from my own life. I steadied myself, feeling the floor beneath my heels, anchoring through my breath. My hands weren't trembling anymore. My shoulders settled just a little. For the first time all night, I wasn't shrinking. I was still, not numb, just aware. The air in the room hadn't changed, but I had. I looked around deliberately now, not searching for help or reassurance, but observing, studying, seeing what I hadn't wanted to see for years. The donors, with their practiced smiles and polite laughter, the men with their cufflinks and wine glasses, the women in silky gowns nodding through speeches they'd heard 100 times. They weren't being rude, they were being normal, predictable. They knew their roles, just like I'd known mine. And that's when it hit me. This room didn't care about truth. It cared about image. Perception wasn't just part of the room, it was the currency, the very air they breathed. And the moment I understood that, something strange happened. I felt calm. Not the peaceful kind, but the precise, surgical kind that comes before something important. Like the silence before a storm, or the space between a decision and an action. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I let the evening continue around me, exactly as it was meant to, because now I understood if I exploded, I'd be the one they'd call unstable, dramatic, emotional, the daughter who couldn't take a joke. But if I waited, if I chose when and how I responded, that would be mine. I could own that moment. He didn't see it. My father was back in conversation now, near the stage, smiling like nothing had happened. One hand on a colleague's back, probably retelling some story about leadership or resilience. I watched the way his body eased, the way he laughed with full breath, like he'd won something. He thought the moment had passed. Of course he did. He thought this was over because I didn't challenge him in front of everyone, because I didn't cause a scene. That was the assumption he always worked from, that silence meant compliance, that not fighting meant agreeing. But he was wrong, and this time I wasn't going to correct him with words. I was going to let him stand there, comfortable and convinced. I was going to let him think he'd gotten away with it, because that made what was coming next more powerful. I glanced again at the stage, at the microphone, still unattended. I saw it now for what it was, not just a tool, but a symbol. He had it because the room gave it to him, because no one questioned whether he deserved it, because that's how power works. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands there, dressed in a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. And what was I? I was supposed to be invisible, gracious, quiet, supportive. Even now, the expectation lingered in the air like perfume, subtle but suffocating. I felt a flicker of fear then, not loud but deep. Fear of saying too much, fear of confirming their worst assumptions about me, fear of the fallout, the backlash, the side eyes at the next family gathering. The phone calls that start with, "You know he didn't mean it like that." I acknowledged the fear. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to erase it. I just let it sit there. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even while fear rides in the passenger seat. A server passed by me with a tray of tiny tarts. I didn't take one. I couldn't taste anything anyway. My body was too alert, too still. I felt like I was in the middle of something that only I could feel. Everyone else kept chatting, clinking glasses, offering compliments that meant nothing. But I was in it, and I was done pretending I wasn't. He stepped away then, just for a moment, maybe to greet someone or refill his drink or bask in another round of validation. I watched him walk, and I saw it, the mic, alone, waiting. I didn't rush. I didn't even breathe deeply. I just took one step forward. That single step didn't feel dramatic. It felt ordinary, like stepping off a curb or reaching for a door handle. The kind of movement no one notices until it's already happened. I crossed the small distance to the stage while conversations continued behind me. A few people were still laughing. Someone clinked a glass. The microphone stood there, upright and unguarded, the red light glowing. Live. I wrapped my fingers around it before my mind had time to interfere. The sound carried farther than I expected. Not loud, just clear. "Excuse me." 2 words, calm, even, not sharp. The room hesitated, like it hadn't quite registered what was happening. Then heads turned, chairs shifted. The soft hum of side conversations thinned out and disappeared. I didn't rush, I didn't raise my voice, I kept it steady. I just wanted to say thank you for the introduction. A pause followed, not awkward, curious. I know it was meant to be lighthearted. That wasn't true, and everyone in the room knew it. But the way I said it unsettled them more than anger would have. I could feel the attention settle on me, heavy and expectant, like the air before rain. I became acutely aware of my body, my feet planted, my shoulders squared, my pulse loud in my ears, but controlled. I wasn't speaking as a daughter. I wasn't speaking as someone offended. I was speaking as a person who expected to be heard. That's when I felt it shift. My father turned, slowly. His smile froze halfway into place, then softened again into something practiced. He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough to reclaim space. "Sweetheart," he said gently into the microphone he no longer held. "This probably isn't the right moment." There it was, polished, reasonable, concerned. A few people nodded instinctively. They recognized that tone, the one that suggests protection while quietly pulling the rug out from under you. He continued, still calm. "You've had a lot on your plate lately, and emotions can run high. We can talk later." He didn't say unstable. He didn't have to. The room wavered. I felt it. That collective uncertainty. The moment where I could lose them completely if I reacted the wrong way. My heart thudded once, hard. For a split second, fear flared. Not panic, but the cold understanding of how quickly this could go sideways. How easily I could be framed as the problem. I had seen it happen to others. I had watched people be quietly discredited with a smile. I recognized the move immediately, and that recognition steadied me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue with his version. I didn't correct him. Instead, I shifted the frame. "This isn't about how I feel," I said evenly, "and it's not about emotions." That got their attention back. "This is about how decisions get made, about who gets to define what matters." The room went still again, not confused this time, alert. I glanced at my father, then back at the audience. When someone stands up here and introduces another adult's life work as a joke, that's not harmless. It's positioning. A murmur rippled through the crowd, subtle, uneasy. I work with people most of us never see. People we talk around, people whose lives don't fit neatly into a ballroom like this. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't expected this angle, not this tone. "I don't need applause," I continued, "but I won't stand quietly while my work is minimized to make someone else feel bigger." Silence spread. Real silence this time. No shifting, no coughing, no polite noise to soften the moment. I felt it land. My father's hand froze mid-gesture. His face held its expression, but something behind it had gone still. That was when I told them what my father never expected me to say out loud. "My name is on the funding agreement for tonight's gala," I said clearly, calmly. "The mental health nonprofit hosting this event? I've been on their board for 3 years." I could feel the shift in the room like someone had pulled a curtain back. You could hear the air conditioning hum now. Someone's fork slipped against their plate with a sharp clink. I didn't fill the silence. I let it settle. I didn't come here to talk about my job, I said. I came to support a cause I believe in. But since my presence has become a subject of public amusement, let me clarify a few things. I turned slightly, not toward him, but enough that he could see I wasn't hiding from him. I manage clinical operations for 2 residential treatment programs. I oversee staffing, compliance, crisis protocols. I write grant evaluations. I've sat in rooms with state auditors and parents holding their breath at 2 a.m., praying their kid will still be alive in the morning. I let that land. Still no drama, just facts. My work doesn't need your approval, I said, my voice level. It needs accountability, consistency, and respect, which is exactly what this room claims to be funding. I looked out over the donors, the suits, the polite hands folded in their laps. Some shifted in their chairs, some looked down. That includes your matching pledge, Dad, I added without flinching. That's when he finally reacted. He stepped forward, too quickly, trying to smile as if this was all a misunderstanding. Let's not do this now, he said, but the pitch of his voice betrayed him. It had tightened, gone a little too high. He glanced at the crowd, trying to pull them back. You know how she gets, always so passionate. That's what makes her good at what she does. He tried to laugh, but it came out dry. She's always had this flair for the dramatic. I'm not performing, I said, not raising my voice, but cutting clean through his. I'm stating facts. I turned back to the microphone, steady again. I've already spoken with the board about redirecting the discretionary matching funds if they're misrepresented. Any individual donor who thinks my father's presence here implies he's leading this initiative should talk to legal. He blinked. Fast, twice. I'm not here as his daughter tonight. I'm here as a partner in the programs he tried to make into a punchline. He tried one last time. This isn't how things are done. And I replied, that's why they haven't worked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The room had stopped looking at me like I was the interruption. They were looking at him now. Some of the donors I recognized. A few had emailed me before. One woman across the room, Linda, I think, nodded slowly. Her mouth was tight, her hands folded tight in her lap, but she was listening, really listening. I didn't gloat. I didn't push further. This wasn't about punishment. This isn't revenge, I said plainly, as if reading their thoughts. It's responsibility. And I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm asking you to stop pretending silence is neutral. Then I stepped back from the mic. I didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. Just stillness. My father was standing off to the side now, one hand in his pocket, the other tightening and releasing around his cufflink like he was trying to unscrew the moment. The man who had spent decades in this community commanding rooms with stories and easy charm suddenly had nothing left to say. I didn't look at him again. I walked down the steps of the stage and kept walking through the middle of the ballroom. No one stopped me, no one called after me, no one whispered loud enough to make me turn around. I passed the dessert table, untouched. The silent auction station, half abandoned. The table where I'd sat earlier now looked like it belonged to someone else. And when I pushed open the doors to the hallway, the quiet felt different. Not hollow, not like retreat. Clean. I didn't wait to see how they would react. I already knew. I walked slowly down the corridor, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. My body still held the echo of the ballroom's noise, but everything around me now felt muted. No spotlight, no audience. Just the long hallway, lined with wall sconces and the occasional table of untouched brochures. Each step I took pulled the adrenaline a little further from my limbs. I wasn't shaking anymore, but I wasn't steady either. I felt hollow, not in a painful way, just emptied out. Like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath too long. I found a bench near the coat check, the kind nobody ever actually sat on, and lowered myself onto it. My back met the wall, my shoulders sagging not from defeat, but from release. My palms were slightly damp. I rubbed them on the sides of my dress. The room inside was likely still frozen, sorting out what had just happened, but I wasn't wondering anymore. That part was over. Outside the glass doors, the evening air had cooled. A few leaves scraped gently across the concrete. Fall was almost here. And for the first time that night, I felt the chill and didn't shiver. I leaned back, closed my eyes. My breath slowed. The light fabric of my dress pressed against my ribs with each inhale. A reminder that I was still here, still me. Just not the version of me they'd been used to seeing. It was strange, how quiet justice could feel. There were no fireworks, no applause, just silence. And still, it was the loudest moment of my life. I didn't need to check my phone to know what was coming. There'd be emails, questions, probably a few attempts at damage control. My father would make his calls, spin his version, scramble to hold on to something that already slipped. But I wouldn't be part of that scramble. There would be meetings, reviews, board inquiries, formal, professional, procedural. I'd already sent the right documents to the right people. No dramatic fallout. Just systems doing what they were supposed to do. And that was enough. I knew there wouldn't be a conversation between us. No apology waiting in the wings. My father wasn't the kind of man who unpacked consequences. He moved on, or pretended to. Maybe at some point, he'd tell people he was proud of me, but it would be too late. And I wouldn't be around to hear it. Some endings don't come with closure. They just stop. And for the first time, I could live with that. My work didn't need explaining. It didn't need defending. I wasn't going to define it by how much others misunderstood it, especially not him. I used to rehearse answers for him in my head, lines about my job, the patients, the staff I supported, the changes we made. I'd imagine him finally understanding. But that wasn't the point anymore. I understood, and that was enough. I looked down at my hands, resting now in my lap. The same hands that had written reports late into the night, that had held someone's trembling wrist through a panic attack, that had signed forms my father mocked. They weren't ashamed anymore. A memory stirred, the sound of his voice introducing me that night, reduced to a joke at my expense. And I rewrote it, quietly, just for myself. My daughter, a leader in trauma-informed care. A woman who built systems where broken people could actually heal. I let that version echo for a while. No one had to hear it. I heard it. That was enough. I stood up, slowly. My feet felt the floor beneath me, solid again. There was no fanfare. No one followed me. No one clapped or called my name. But as I walked toward the exit, I realized something important. Strength didn't mean absorbing more pain. It didn't mean holding still while people chipped away at you. It meant choosing when to speak, choosing when to walk away, choosing, period. As I reached the door, I glanced back, not toward the ballroom, but at the version of myself I was leaving behind. The one who waited for permission to be taken seriously. The one who thought being good meant being quiet. She wasn't weak. She got me this far. But I wasn't taking her with me. I opened the door and stepped into the cool night. I didn't win a room. I won myself.